I suspect most of us have read at least one book which has caused us to profoundly change our perspective on an issue which we care about. It recently has happened to me. As the Observer reviewer says on the cover, Gaia Vince's Nomad Century, How to Survive the Climate Upheaval, is a book which should be read not just by every politician, but by every person on the planet. Its central message is that climate change will, this century, make large parts of the planet where most of the world's population currently live increasingly uninhabitable. This in turn will lead to billions of people, yes, I did say billions of people, migrating to more habitable parts of the world. It is something that people will feel compelled to do and will happen regardless of whether permission is given for such movement or not. The issue for governments, indeed for humanity as a whole, is how such migration should be managed. Over the next 50 years, hotter temperatures combined with more intense humidity are set to make large parts of the world uninhabitable. Fleeing the tropics, the coasts and former arable lands, huge populations will need to seek new homes. All of us will be hugely impacted, either as climate refugees ourselves or here in Britain and Northern Europe, responding to the arrival of millions of climate refugees from elsewhere. Vince believes that this mass migration is best regarded as a challenge which, if managed effectively, could lead to humans continuing to survive and thrive in a newly created world order. Crucially, mass migration is not a problem, but rather a solution. Vince has a scientific background and appears to be well informed about climate change issues and the need for a green transition. She advocates measures to decarbonise energy and transportation and the importance of transitioning to a plant-based diet. She believes, however, that even with the adoption of such measures, a rise in global temperature is already baked in, that there is likely to be a 4-degree rise from pre-industrial levels by 2100, 4 degrees. Such an increase will force people to move, up to 1.5 billion by 2050, she thinks, and 3 billion, perhaps, by 2100. I think my 4-year-old grandson's colouring improved one of the illustrations in this book. It's showing belts of habitability on an end-of-century planet. Because, of course, the temperature rise, the habitable, the uninhabitable regions won't be regular and fixed. We cannot be quite certain how uninhabitable specific locations will become by 2100 or sooner. But in a world where global temperatures have risen by 4 degrees, the message is clear. Take a look at the map. The optimum place for human habitation and economic activity, coloured green, will be the far north, Canada, Scandinavia, northern Russia, along with the far south, New Zealand, Patagonia, parts of Antarctica. The world's largest cities are all on the red edges of the increasingly uninhabitable orange zones, or in the uninhabitable red zone itself. With reference to the USA, Vince refers to everywhere south of the 45 degrees north parallel, which runs just north of New York, as becoming increasingly uninhabitable. It appears to be a truly frightening prospect. But Vince remains optimistic and believes there is a solution. It lies in a grand plan for managed migration, organised by governments across the world. She believes it will be possible to facilitate the migration of billions of people from what will become uninhabitable regions to those parts of the world where the climate will remain comfortable for human habitation. In order to do so, there will need to be international cooperation combined with a change of mindset. We will need to consider everyone everywhere a citizen of the earth, as well as of their existing nation states, perhaps involving the granting of a United Nations citizenship to the entire population of the world, she suggests. Resources will need to be found to create high-density housing in more temperate regions, whilst recent improvements in agricultural productivity will have to be ramped up to feed a growing world population, which is likely to peak at around 10 billion people by the end of the century. As an example of the extent of the challenge the world faces, she makes the point that half of the world's food is currently produced on smallholder farms, involving hard physical labour, but that as the world warms, there will be more and more days when it will be physically impossible to work outside in large parts of the world where this farming takes place. This food will have to be grown elsewhere. Those parts of the world where permanent human habitation will become impossible could become locations for vast solar and wind farms, managed and maintained largely remotely. The alternative is not carrying on as we are, but rather a future involving unmanaged migration in a context of war and conflict. And in her concluding words, she takes hope from the recent COVID experience, which transformed our understanding of what is normal and socially possible, including so many of us voluntarily restricting our movements to within meters of our homes. People were prepared to stay put in the interests of society and to protect themselves. Similarly, climate refugees will be prepared, indeed forced to move in their millions. And Vince believes that if we start as soon as possible, there's a chance to make a plan work. There could be a planned, managed, peaceful transition to a safer, fairer world. With international cooperation and regulation, we could and should make the earth livable. That has to be worth trying. So let's begin.